People often say that twins share everything: the same birthday, the same smile, and sometimes even the same dreams. But my brother Evan and I shared only one thing: the day we were born. From the moment we were old enough to understand words, everyone made sure we knew we were different. Evan was the miracle child. By the age of 6, he could solve math problems meant for teenagers. Teachers praised him as a genius. Neighbors came to meet the brilliant twin. And my parents proudly displayed every certificate he earned across our living room walls. Whenever guests visited, they gathered around Evan, asking him impossible questions that he answered with effortless confidence. Then they would turn to me. "So, what are you good at?" I never had an answer. Reading took me longer than the other kids. Numbers danced across the page, refusing to stay still. No matter how hard I studied, my grades barely improved. Every report card felt like another reminder that I wasn't enough. My father would sigh heavily as he looked at my results. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" My mother rarely defended me. Instead, she'd smile proudly at Evan before saying the words that slowly broke my heart. "Some children are simply born special." The unspoken ending was always clear, and some aren't. At first, Evan tried to help me. He patiently explained homework and encouraged me when I became frustrated. But as we grew older, even he couldn't escape our parents' expectations. Every family dinner became another comparison. Evan won another science competition. Ethan barely passed another spelling test. Eventually, I stopped talking during meals altogether. School wasn't much kinder. Teachers seated me beside Evan, hoping his intelligence would somehow rub off on me. Instead, classmates laughed whenever I gave the wrong answer. "Even your twin thinks you're slow." One boy whispered after seeing Evan finish an exam while I was still on the first page. I pretended not to care. Inside, I believed every word. The only place I ever felt calm was in my grandfather's old shed behind the house. Before he passed away, he had taught me how to sand rough wood until it became smooth. While everyone admired perfect grades, I loved creating things with my hands. Broken chairs became beautiful again. Scrap wood became little toy cars. In that tiny workshop, I finally felt capable. But my parents never cared. One afternoon, my father found me carving a small wooden bird. "You've wasted another Saturday in here," he snapped. I looked down at the bird in my hands. "I just like making things." He laughed, a cold, disappointed laugh. "You'll never build a future with useless hobbies." That night, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. "We can't keep sacrificing Evan's future." My mother whispered, "He deserves every opportunity." My father replied, "We spend too much time worrying about Ethan." There was a long silence before my mother spoke again. "I found a place. They said they'll take him." My heart stopped. "They'll tell him we're coming back." My father answered quietly, "It's kinder that way." I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from crying. 2 days later, they packed my clothes into a faded blue backpack. My mother avoided my eyes as we drove to a children's shelter on the edge of town. Before leaving, she knelt beside me and forced a smile. "We just need to take care of a few things, sweetheart," she said softly. "We'll come back soon." I watched their car disappear down the road. I waited until sunset, then midnight, then the next morning. They never came back. At just 10 years old, I finally understood the truth. My parents hadn't abandoned a bad child. They had abandoned the one they believed would never be good enough. For the first few weeks at the children's shelter, I refused to unpack my backpack. Every morning, I folded my blanket, sat by the front window, and watched the driveway. Whenever a car slowed near the gate, my heart raced. I convinced myself it was my parents coming to take me home. "They'll be here today." I whispered, but today became tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week, then next month. The social workers stopped asking if I wanted to call my parents. They already knew the answer. Every phone call went straight to voicemail, and every letter I wrote came back unopened. Eventually, I stopped waiting. I was only 10 years old, but I learned one of life's hardest lessons far too early. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you simply choose not to. Life at the shelter wasn't cruel, but it wasn't home either. There were dozens of children, each carrying invisible scars. Some had lost their parents. Others had been rescued from dangerous homes. We rarely talked about why we were there. We didn't have to. The sadness in our eyes said enough. School didn't become easier. I still struggled to read long passages, and math tests filled me with dread. My classmates knew I lived at the shelter, and a few made sure everyone else knew it too. There's the kid whose parents didn't even want him, one boy sneered. His words hurt because part of me believed they were true. The only place I could escape was the small workshop behind the shelter. It was dusty, filled with old tools and broken furniture waiting to be repaired. Most kids ignored it. I loved it. Whenever I held a hammer or a piece of sandpaper, the noise inside my head became quiet. I couldn't solve complicated equations, but I could turn a cracked table into something beautiful. I could build shelves, repair chairs, and carve little wooden animals that made the younger children smile. One rainy afternoon, while I was repairing an old rocking chair, an elderly couple visited the shelter. The man had silver hair, rough hands, and kind blue eyes. His wife smiled warmly at every child she met. They introduced themselves as Arthur and Grace Bennett. Unlike other visitors, they didn't ask about my grades or test scores. Arthur noticed the chair I was fixing and walked over. "Did you do this yourself?" he asked. I nodded nervously. "It isn't perfect." He ran his hand across the smooth wood and smiled. "Neither am I." That simple sentence stayed with me. Instead of interviewing me in an office, Arthur spent the afternoon working beside me. We repaired the chair together, talking about wood, tools, and old houses. For the first time in years, I laughed without worrying about saying something wrong. A month later, Arthur and Grace adopted me. Their house wasn't large. It sat on a quiet country road with a little garden and a workshop bigger than the living room. It wasn't filled with expensive furniture or trophies. It was filled with love. On my first night there, I accidentally dropped a dinner plate while helping set the table. The plate shattered across the kitchen floor. I froze. I expected shouting. I expected disappointment. Instead, Grace knelt beside me and gently squeezed my shoulder. "Are you hurt?" I stared at her. You're not angry." She smiled. "Plates can be replaced. You can't." Those 4 words broke something inside me. I burst into tears. Not because of the broken plate, but because no one had ever cared more about me than about a mistake I'd made. Arthur became the father I had always wished for. Every evening after school, we worked together in his workshop. He never rushed me or compared me to anyone else. He simply said, "Take your time, learn one step at a time." Slowly, my confidence grew. School was still difficult, but I stopped measuring my worth by report cards. My new parents celebrated every improvement, no matter how small. A passing grade earned the same proud smile as a perfect one. One evening, while we were finishing a handcrafted dining table, Arthur looked at me and said, "The world needs brilliant minds, Ethan, but it also needs honest hands. Never let anyone convince you that your gift matters less." For the first time since being abandoned, I looked at my future with hope instead of fear. My biological parents had judged me by what I couldn't do. Arthur and Grace chose to see what I could become. And that made all the difference. 22 years passed faster than I ever imagined. The frightened 10-year-old boy who had once waited by the shelter window no longer existed. In his place stood a man who had built a life with his own hands, literally. Arthur's little workshop had grown into Bennett Custom Woodworks, one of the most respected handcrafted furniture companies in the country. What began with repairing old chairs had become a business employing more than 200 people. Our work appeared in luxury hotels, historic homes, and magazines that celebrated fine craftsmanship. Every piece of furniture carried a small engraved message underneath, made with patience. Those words were Arthur's philosophy. He had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving me not just his business but his greatest lesson. A person's value is measured by their character, not their achievements. Grace still visited the workshop every Friday afternoon. Even in her 70s, she insisted on bringing homemade cookies for the staff. Everyone called her Grandma Grace, and she loved every second of it. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. My assistant knocked gently on my office door. "Ethan," she said, placing an envelope on my desk. This was marked as personal. The handwriting on the front instantly made my stomach tighten. I recognized it. Even after more than 2 decades, I knew my mother's handwriting. For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times as a child. Back then, I dreamed it would contain an apology, an explanation, or even a birthday card. Now I wasn't sure. I wanted to know what it said. Taking a deep breath, I opened it. Inside was a single page. "Dear Ethan, we know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we desperately need to see you. So much has happened. Your brother has left us, and our family has fallen apart. Please, give us one chance to explain. We have nowhere else to turn." At the bottom were their phone number and address. No mention of 22 birthdays they had missed. No mention of the little boy they had abandoned. Just one sentence that stood out more than any other. "We have nowhere else to turn." I folded the letter and quietly placed it back inside the envelope. For the first time in years, I wondered about Evan. What had happened to the brother I'd once admired? A week later, curiosity led me to search his name online. The headlines shocked me. "Famous research scientist takes indefinite leave after public breakdown." According to several news articles, Evan had spent years leading groundbreaking research projects while facing impossible expectations. Colleagues described him as brilliant but exhausted. During an international conference, he had suddenly walked off the stage in the middle of his speech. He disappeared from public life the very next day. Friends later revealed that he had been under enormous pressure since childhood. Pressure from our parents. As I read the articles, I realized something painful. They hadn't truly loved either of us. I had been rejected for not being extraordinary. Evan had been trapped because he was. We were both victims, just in different ways. 3 days later, my receptionist called my office. "Ethan, there are 2 people here asking for you." I looked through the security camera. Time had changed them. My father's shoulders were bent with age. My mother's confident posture had been replaced by nervous uncertainty. The expensive clothes they once wore were gone, replaced with faded jackets and worried expressions. They looked defeated. I walked into the reception area. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Then my mother stepped forward with tears in her eyes. Ethan, hearing my name in her voice after 22 years felt strange. She reached out as if to hug me. I instinctively stepped back. The hurt on her face was obvious. "We've missed you so much," she whispered. I looked at both of them calmly. "No," I replied. "You've missed what I became." Silence filled the room. My father lowered his eyes. "We made terrible mistakes." I was 10 years old. I answered quietly. "You didn't lose me. You left me." Neither of them denied it. Instead, my father admitted the truth. After investing nearly all their savings into supporting Evan's career, they had accumulated enormous debts. When Evan cut off contact following his breakdown, they lost both financial stability and the son they had placed all their hopes on. Only then had they searched for me, only after discovering that the child they abandoned had become successful. They hadn't come looking for Ethan. They had come looking for the owner of Bennett Custom Woodworks. For a long moment, I simply studied their faces. The anger I had carried for years was gone. In its place was something much quieter. Disappointment. Finally, I spoke. "I'll have dinner with you tomorrow night." Hope immediately returned to their faces. "But understand this," I added, "tomorrow isn't about giving you another chance. It's about giving myself the ending to this story that I deserved years ago." They nodded silently. Neither of them realized that by the end of that dinner, the greatest lesson wouldn't be mine. It would be theirs. The next evening, I reserved the private dining room of a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. My biological parents arrived early, dressed in their best clothes, trying to look confident despite the worry on their faces. When I walked in, they both stood. For a brief moment, it almost looked like an ordinary family reunion. Almost. My mother smiled nervously. "Thank you for coming, Ethan." I nodded politely and took my seat. They spent the first few minutes asking harmless questions about my health, my business, and where I lived. They spoke as though the 22 years between us had been nothing more than a long vacation. Then my father finally cleared his throat. "Ethan, we've fallen on difficult times." I looked at him without speaking. "Our savings are gone," he admitted. The house was sold, medical bills, debts, everything piled up, we thought. He hesitated before finishing. "We thought maybe you could help us get back on our feet." There it was, not an apology, not regret. A request. I smiled, not with anger, but with complete understanding. I expected that. Both of them lowered their eyes. Before either could respond, the restaurant door opened again. Arthur's wife, Grace, walked inside. Beside her was another familiar face, Evan. My brother looked older than his age, his shoulders weighed down by years of pressure. The confidence that had once amazed everyone had been replaced by quiet humility. My parents stared in shock. "You invited them," my mother whispered. "I invited my family." I answered calmly. Grace sat beside me, gently squeezing my hand. Evan looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology," he said. "When we were kids, I saw what they were doing. I was too scared to stand up for you. I told myself I couldn't change anything, but I should have tried." I saw genuine tears in his eyes. For the first time since childhood, I believed him. "You were just a child too," I said softly. The silence that followed felt lighter than any words. Then I stood and removed a folded document from my briefcase. "I want all of you to see this." I slid it across the table. My parents opened it together. Their eyes widened. It was the official paperwork confirming a multi-million-dollar charitable foundation. At the top, in bold letters, was its name, the Arthur and Grace Bennett Children's Foundation. Beneath it was a list of children's shelters, scholarship programs, foster care initiatives, and vocational workshops funded by the foundation. I looked at my parents. "Do you know why I created this?" Neither of them answered. Because 22 years ago, a frightened little boy sat in a shelter waiting for parents who never came back. My mother's tears began to fall. I promised myself that if I ever succeeded, no child abandoned the way I was would feel completely alone. I took a slow breath. Over the past 5 years, we've donated millions to children's shelters, education programs, and adoption services. My father whispered millions. Yes. He looked hopeful again. "So, perhaps," I gently shook my head. "No." His expression collapsed. "I will gladly spend my fortune helping abandoned children." I paused before continuing. "But I won't spend it rescuing the people who abandoned one." The room became perfectly silent. there was no shouting. No insults, just the truth. I forgive you, I said quietly. Carrying hatred only hurts the person holding it. My mother's face brightened with hope. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. Her smile disappeared. You taught me that family is more than blood. Arthur and Grace chose me when you didn't. They celebrated every small victory, believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and loved me without conditions. I turned toward Grace. Everything good in my life exists because two strangers decided I was worth loving. Grace wiped away her tears. Evan stood and walked around the table. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he hugged me. I'm proud to call you my brother, he whispered. I hugged him back. It was the first real embrace we'd ever shared. Our parents watched quietly, realizing that while they had lost one son to impossible expectations and another to cruel rejection, the bond between the twins had survived without them. As we left the restaurant, my father called after me, I know we don't deserve another chance. I turned one last time. No, I replied gently, you don't, but I truly hope you become better people. Those were the last words I ever spoke to them. A week later, I visited the same children's shelter where I had spent those lonely months so many years ago. The building had been completely renovated through our foundation's donations. As I walked through the halls, I noticed a little boy sitting alone near the window, clutching a faded backpack. He looked exactly the way I once had. I sat beside him. Are you waiting for someone? I asked. He nodded without looking at me. My mom said she'd come back. I knew that sentence. I had lived that sentence. Instead of giving him false hope, I smiled kindly. You know something. He looked up. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family that changes your life. He frowned. What do you mean? I pointed toward the playground where volunteers laughed with the children. It means your story isn't over. Years ago, I had believed being abandoned meant I wasn't enough. Now I understood the truth. I had never been the problem. The people who failed to love me were, and the sweetest revenge wasn't becoming richer than them. It wasn't watching them lose everything. It was building a life so full of love, purpose, and kindness that their rejection no longer had the power to define me. Because in the end, the boy they abandoned became the man who gave thousands of forgotten children something he had once needed most. A reason to believe they were enough.